Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about Markus Wulfhart in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. And this is easily one of the most outdated campaigns in Total War at this point. It's not the worst campaign in the game when you have Mazda Mundi or the Demon Prince or the Changeling available there as well, but it's certainly not a great campaign by any stretch of imagination. However, what I think is really important to talk about with this specific campaign is what it represents from a design philosophy from Creative Assembly, in terms of campaign design philosophy and difficulty philosophy. See, Creative Assembly ever since Shogun 2, basically, Shogun 2, Rome 2, Attila, had this idea of how they would make a campaign difficult, quote unquote. And really what it ended up being is either an atrocious grindy mess or something that would just end up wasting a lot of our time because of very frustrating to deal with systems. For what it is worth, Creative Assembly has since moved on from these systems, but then you get into the discussion of people saying that campaigns are too easy these days in Total War. Campaigns in Total War are too short. That's certainly true, but it's gotta be understood that the solution to those problems is not moving back to what CA used to do, rather finding a path forward. Now, there are various ideas I would have on this subject, but let's consider how CA used to handle things. So one of the problems you had in Shogun 2 and Rome 2 especially is the issue of public order, now called control. In effect, when you were playing a lot of campaigns on Legendary difficulty in particular, you would have significant issues of control. It wasn't so bad in Shogun 2 as it was in Rome 2, but it would still be an issue. And this created a kind of gameplay loop that is still present, by the way, to this day in Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2, not so much in Warhammer 3. But there was the idea that you would take territory and then you would get a constant wave of rebellions. It was pretty bad also with the corruption, which amplified the issue, like the old system of corruption also amplified the issue, just creating this kind of system like you would take territory, it would take many turns to get that territory under control. And you might think, oh, okay, so you're not in a situation where you can just expand without any consequence. Except, here's the problem with that mentality. Except, you did. Because you realized, well, I can get a lot of rebellions. What are rebellions? They're largely a lot of experience, a lot of money for free. And if you can guarantee rebellions are constantly spawning, you can kind of create a gameplay loop, which, by the way, people did do back in Warhammer 1 and 2, in order to level up their lords, in order to gain money. You might not necessarily take as much territory as you can right now in Warhammer 3, but what you're just basically doing is you're sitting in a province constantly farming the experience that was coming your way. And this is where Markus Wulfhart's mechanics are especially bad, because they kind of represent that, but overcharged. Because Markus Wulfhart's unique campaign mechanic is the hostility meter. This affects your control by -5 in all provinces if it goes up. And you can never remove this control meter. And then, for much of the campaign, though not all of it, you do get constant rogue armies spawning that are just like rebellions for experience. So one of the things you could do with Markus Wulfhart campaigns, and one of the things you can still do right here in Warhammer 3, is like, okay, I know I'm going to get rebellions, let me just farm them. Farm those rebellions. That is an issue. That doesn't mean we don't have a lot of territory we can take. In fact, one of the things to be said about Markus Wulfhart is the victory conditions are so crazy that you are incentivized in point of fact to take a lot of territory. But you end up in this kind of awful situation where you're just like constantly dealing with a rebellion, poor public order, which affects other things, growth in particular being affected by it, recruitment costs being affected by it. But at the same time, you don't have like a campaign. And this is the trap you might fall into. You might think, oh, that just pushes you to take it more slow and strategic. No, in point of fact, quite the opposite. When you're in that situation where you know you're always going to get these rebellions, you're always going to deal with those rogue armies, in fact, it incentivizes you to go even crazier and rely on those rebellions and rogue armies to allow you to build up a larger number of armies because you can't afford them. And so you have armies that are constantly on the offensive, and then you have armies that are just constantly farming that experience again and again and again and again. And also, this creates a situation in a campaign where you don't even necessarily develop settlements properly, because in order to deal with a constant wave of rebellions at one point, you just decide, okay, I'm just going to get these controlled buildings in multiple settlements. I remember when I was playing the Charlemagne DLC for Attila. And what I realized is that the best way I could handle that campaign was ignore a lot of the building variety and just literally go for control buildings in every single settlement. Or you could farm rebellions. That is not a fun, great system. Rebellions have never really worked all that well in Total War. They're either a frustrating annoyance or they're free experience. There's no in between on that subject. So that's one of the issues that you do deal with in a Markus Wulfhart campaign. It does really represent a very outdated way of how difficulty should be handled. And mind you, this is not just something CA is to blame for, it's also modders that are to blame for it. Even as far back as Rome 1 and Medieval 2 mods, one of the things that modders would do with overhauls would be to make it so that conquering a good amount of territory, was incredibly slow and painful and tedious. That's my perspective on that matter. I'm not saying that campaigns should be about conquering as much territory as possible, but if the only reason you're not doing so is because, it's not necessarily going to generate you the resources you want, well, that just means you're still doing it, but you realize you're not getting the territory to develop it. You're getting the territory to loot, sack, pillage, burn, and raid everything to the ground. That is the flip side of all of this, by the way. Or with region trading available, you just take territory, you sell it to other factions, you don't bother with it yourself. Like, for instance, in this campaign, I did take a decent amount of territory myself, but I also sold territory to Yanbo, and I also literally made an alliance with the Dark Elves to sell territory to them. And in point of fact, there might be too much territory I have in this campaign, because I could have sold even more than that to Recarve. In fact, it might have saved me a lot of trouble in this campaign if what I had literally done is this campaign is sold the vast majority of territory I gained to Yanbo, Recarve, and maybe Alberic if I had saved him from Skulltaker. I let him die, really, but yeah, I just decided that was not really worth it. See, this is the problem when you create a gameplay loop where it's like, oh yeah, taking territory is not worth it because you're not really going to get a lot of tangible results. That just creates a campaign situation where, okay, I'll still advance because it's experience, it's money, it's loot. I just don't want to develop that territory. And if it falls to rebellions or enemy forces just take it back, what do I care about it? Unless it's victory conditions that might require me to take that territory, in which case, okay, I will do my best to get diplomatic allies who then hold my territory for me because they get a bunch of ridiculous benefits that allow them to completely ignore all of those issues that I have in holding that territory. So instead of me building a massive empire, I'm literally helping other factions do so because it's not worth it for me personally to do so. So if the intent is to slow down the player, that is mission failed. Successfully, I should add. Again, all these things that you might hear over the years about like things like growth, public order, replenishment, recruitment slots, they don't push you. They don't stop you from conquering a lot of territory. What they do is quite the opposite. If you have a race that has poor replenishment, the dwarves did this before Thrones Decay, it doesn't mean you sit on your ass and just play like that. No, it means you build an army that's really effective at taking very few casualties. You conquer a lot of territory and then you don't bother with that territory unless it's in victory condition. You can bother with developing your core territories or funneling all the money there, but you're still taking a lot of territory. That was the problem with the dwarves pre-Thrones of Decay. In fact, the post-Thrones of Decay dwarves are actually far better at playing tall than the dwarves used to be. It's a similar idea with the Wood Elves. Like, consider a Wood Elf campaign, like, even in Warhammer 3, and this is a perfect example. When you're playing Wood Elves, you literally have very few incentives towards taking a lot of territory around the map. Does that mean you just sit on your ass in your forest the entire campaign? No, absolutely not. In fact, because you care so little about what the territory does, it just means you go completely insane, completely aggressive, conquer everything in sight, and then either sell it off to other factions, or literally just abandon it. Because it's not worth it. I mean, unless it's part of a forest, and then you might bother with it, but that's just literally regions around the forest. And even then, you can still get the forest growth by selling it to other factions and letting those factions hold that territory, getting money in return. Now, granted, that is a specific thing to Warhammer 3 because of region trading, but I think you understand the point of what I'm trying to make here. So that is one of the very, very substantial issues that you do have over here. Then, with Markus Wulfhart, you also have the aspect of how he gains units. So a lot of things are locked in his campaign from the beginning, and you have to unlock them by fighting battles, conquering territory, increasing the Imperial mandate. Well, the issue with the Imperial mandate units is, yes, you do get things like cannons, hellstorms, high-end units like steam tanks. You can get steam tanks in this campaign for the system.
Kill to protect.
This is not something that's incentivizes you to play carefully, and point of fact, that incentivizes you to go even crazier, because you know you could lose half your freaking army, and if you just get the supply, you might be able to replenish that instantly. It also disincentivizes you, the fact that he has all these special heroes, kind of legendary heroes, but not quite. The fact that he has all these heroes, it disincentivizes you from getting heroes regularly. So instead of engaging with the way the Empire works right now after Thrones of Decay and Markus Wulfhart, you can ignore all of that and just get a bunch of heroes, create an unstoppable army, and conquer all your territory that you need in order to win the campaign. And mind you, there is a lot of shit you need to do here in this campaign in order to quote-unquote win. By win, I mean achieving your long campaign victory condition, not domination victory condition, really. The domination campaign victory condition is ridiculous anyway, with regards to that aspect. But yeah, you get great swords, you get huntsmen, you get artillery, you get a whole bunch of different things over here in this campaign for fulfilling the Imperial mandate. That means you're not really in a situation in this campaign where at any point you really care that much about proper unit recruitment. So you're bypassing the regular campaign systems to get a bunch of free stuff, basically. Well, quote-unquote free, but it is free for what it's worth. When I say it is free, I mean in the sense that if I, say, were to recruit an army, right here, Boris Todbringer, yeah, these units, or some of these units, may cost money, specifically the Electricon troops, but a lot of the Imperial Mandate troops don't. And that is a very significant advantage, if you will, in this campaign. But that's just part of the problem. Everything I have explained is part of the problem. Then we have the victory conditions. The victory conditions over here that we have are absurd. So if some people have this idea of like, let's play carefully, strategic, all that, that is far from the case in a Markus Wulfhart campaign, because you might be spending hundreds of turns to accomplish these victory conditions, or hoping someone else is doing them for you. Because you need to eliminate Hexoatl, and then you need to eliminate Clan Pestilent, or someone needs to do so. But typically that would be the Lizardman, and you need to eliminate, and you need to have Itza eliminated, and then the Awakened. So you have a short campaign victory condition, basically something that would regularly take you 30 turns, that's as long as your long campaign victory condition. And the only reason your long campaign victory condition might take longer to do is because you or your allies, which is certainly what I'm using here, you or your allies need to control virtually all of Lustria. I mean, you then get into the problem of how Lustria's terrain is completely broken, how moving around this is not a particularly fun experience in a campaign. But I've talked about Lustria's issues many times before. Suffice to say, Lustria is not great, partly because of the way the map is designed, partly because how long it takes to move in jungle. And one of the things that isn't especially great for Lustria is when your faction is not supporting you greatly in terms of climate. Think of this. In a lot of campaigns, one of the things that you want to have in order to have a great campaign experience is climate variety, because that opens up a whole other set of possibilities that you wouldn't have otherwise. Well, in this specific campaign, you don't have access to actual temperate climate. So that means the Empire itself, even if you do Confederate factions of the Empire, like I Confederate Karl France over here, you realize that spending all your time over here developing this territory, never mind the constant control issues you will be getting over here. Oh, and don't get me started on control issues between Hostility and the Confederation control issue, because that is just wonderful to really tackle in a campaign. But you end up in a situation where vast portions of the map are not really available to you, because why would you go there? Like, it's just a waste of time, resources. So if you're serious about playing a campaign, you will ignore it. Or in this case, I took the Land of Assassins and I've sold it to Rapans after beating the crap out of Rapans because, hey, experience and money. Seriously. Beat up someone, then sell territory to them. That is specifically a Warhammer free issue with region trading, but Markus Wulfhart is incentivized to abuse these things as opposed to doing anything different. And if we couldn't region trade, for the record, if we couldn't region trade, then okay, I would just literally abandon all of this territory because it's not worth bothering with in any way, shape, or form. At least you can eliminate the rogue army you're dealing with, but you're going to constantly be playing this campaign with a low public order level. Then there are the heroes that Markus Wulfhart has, and the way that system, you engage in that system. To even unlock these heroes, you have to send characters in specific regions in Lustria. So there is one hero that gets unlocked over here. There is one hero that gets unlocked over here in the Spine of Sotek. The two important ones, actually. So Jorik and Roderick get unlocked in those regions. The other two are in a better state of affairs, but then you get objectives. One of the worst aspects that Warhammer 1 and 2 had were the constant objectives for various quests. Something you can still see, by the way, with Norsca, and one of the things that is an issue for Norsca is like, oh, you want to unlock certain levels of power, well, you gotta do this series of objectives. Go raid a region, go get a certain level, go take a specific territory. It doesn't create a great gameplay loop, because a good gameplay loop is when you're gaining something else. Now, in the case of, say, taking the Poxmarsh, yeah, sure, I still need to do that in order to achieve my short campaign victory condition, so that's not too bad. But it's kind of bad when it's telling you to get a specific region in order to get a certain landmark, if you will. Really, that isn't especially great in a campaign. So all these old style objectives that you have with these heroes, again, not a great system to be engaging in. It would be nice to have dilemmas and objectives, but ones that don't require you, oh, just move for like 20 turns to get to a region in order to get access to a hero, and then go to another region to complete an objective for that hero. At least you can do it with any army in your campaign, so you don't have to just run around Markus Wulfhart like a chimpanzee to do it in this campaign. In fact, he never stepped foot in southern Lustria in this entire campaign. My other armies that are now busily conquering territory did all of that. Yeah, Hellstorms. Another thing is like the focus that he has in this campaign. And a bit of a problem with like Thrones of Decay ruining this campaign even more than it already was, because you see, huntsman generals are just absolutely not worth using. Because yes, you can get huntsmen, but you can, and I did so because I get them for free over here in this campaign, but in reality, bothering with huntsmen, well, to begin with, there's a lot of heavily armored units you might be dealing with. Secondly, huntsmen are not especially great against the legions of the legions of Saurus that you might be dealing with. You may want guns, but you don't get guns for free. You have to recruit them. So it's just like the unique campaign systems are fighting with the inherent race design. And you might think, oh, it's providing you a unique experience. All it's really providing in this campaign is a constant sense of frustration, as you feel you're fighting the game in order to get any kind of enjoyment out of this campaign at any point. It is fun when you do get cannons and hellstorms for free, to be sure, but that's about it. Really, that's the only fun aspect. The fact that you have a campaign that's primarily set in jungle warfare, but also requires you to hop on over to Ulthuan in order to deal with the Dread Fleet. That's especially fun because, like, the Dread Fleet does have a tendency of getting territory in Ulthuan. You could hope the High Elves do it, though relying on the AI to accomplish any objective for you, I would say I wish you luck with respect to all that. It can happen. But just like Skarbrand might have had that issue when he had to deal with Akari, you could rely on the High Elves doing it, but there was never a guarantee. Trusting the AI to do your job for you is very questionable, to say the least. So lots of small issues that end up adding together to create the subpar, outdated, and weak overall campaign experience. Now, is it important that CA updates this campaign? I would say there's many other campaigns that could be updated better, but like, yeah, this entire system of a campaign does not incentivize a good playstyle. It incentivizes a bunch of bullshit. It also incentivizes you as a player to, like, what was the intent behind this system? Right, you get a lot of power, but you pay for that power because you're constantly at war with the Lizardmen. You have limited diplomacy with the Lizardmen. That may have worked in Warhammer 2. Like, this is what I mean by outdated. In Warhammer 2, when diplomacy was questionable, to say the least, that was one thing, right? And we're getting a lot of territories to grow quickly and all that, and conquering a lot of territory, you know, because of corruption, because all these systems, the game trying to slow you down. That was questionable, and getting all those Imperial supplies, that could be great. But the problem is, we're no longer in Warhammer 2. That's the issue. Diplomacy is perfectly viable these days with a lot of different factions. And just having a campaign where diplomacy with Lizardmen, where the Lizardmen treat you as they would the Beastmen, is a bit ridiculous. Like, literally, you have no diplomatic options with the Lizardmen. Say what you will about Albrecht. He does he can at least engage in diplomacy. You may not want to do so, but at least you can. Whereas with Markus Wulfhart, he's apparently being treated like the second coming of the Skaven over here in Lestria for whatever reason. It's also not even a thematic campaign for him, because, like, you might think, like Markus Wulfhart and his fur coat in a jungle. That's always been a point of ridicule among the community. I think it does explain something about this campaign. Markus Wulfhart, I don't think he ever stepped foot in Lustria and the lore. And one of the reasons you get something like that happening is because they wanted to create a DLC campaign, and this was a point where CA would add every character to both the Vortex map and Immortal Empires. And then ended up being fairly silly in that respect, because it is very freaking silly to have him there. He never was there. Markus Wulfhart is someone who's probably spent his entire life in the Empire, and he doesn't care necessarily about positions of power. Literally, if I'm not mistaken, Karl had to more or less force a position on him. Markus Wulfhart in the lore is just like, I'm just here to kill beastmen. More or less, that is the purpose of his character in the lore. He's a great archer. He's fighting the foes of the Empire in the actual Empire. What is he doing in Lustria? I have no idea. Perhaps someone can explain that to me at one point, really. I understand, like, there's a story explanation, but it is ridiculous. Costin signing out.